Hello, everybody. My name is Samantha Bonwick, and I'm the outreach coordinator here at the Pinch Creek Library. And I am very happy to welcome you tonight to the second installment of our 2022 Winter Speaker Series. Before we get started, I just thought I would acknowledge that we gather as the Pincher Creek and District Municipal Library on the traditional land of the Piikani people, both past and present. We honor the land itself and the people who have tended to it throughout the generations so that we may work, learn, play, and grow in its beauty in the present and into the future. So I will introduce our lovely speaker for this evening. Tonight we have the great honor to listen to Kevin Vantika. Kevin Vantika was born and raised in Calgary with his family roots in what is now Alberta that go as far back as 1875. He graduated with a degree in plant ecology from the University of Calgary in 1977 and went on to a career with Parks Canada. He retired as the superintendent of Banff in 2011. He has served on the boards of the Nature Conservancy of Canada and the Livingston Landowners Group. He and his wife have owned property near Cali for nearly 3 decades. Kevin is the author of 15 books on wildlife and conservation and writes a regular column, This Land, in the Alberta Views magazine. His most recent book is Wild Roses Are Worth It. So before we get started, I will do a little bit of housekeeping really quick. If you do have a question for Mr. Vantika, please type them into the comments. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat icon. If you click on there, you can just type in all your comments or your questions. And at the end of his presentation, we will give Kevin a chance to listen to our comments and answer our questions as well. I also ask everyone to keep their microphones muted during the presentation, and I think that's everything. I will hand it over to Kevin.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and thank you for setting this whole thing up. This is a kind of a step towards reconnecting people again after all the isolation we've been through. It's kind of neat looking at the list of names here. I know a lot of folks that are here, so this is great. It's sort of a virtual campfire talk. So I guess when you're doing a talk on a book, you're talking a little bit about yourself, or about the author, and you're talking a little bit about the book and what you're trying to achieve with it. So tonight, what I was going to do was just, I've got a couple backup slides that I'm just going to talk over, so you don't have to look at a screen that doesn't have something on it. And I'll probably read 3 short sections as I sort of progress through here. So if you could just bear with me, I'm going to try and use the share screen feature and pull up the slides here. It's looking good. I think it's going to work. If I can get it to... Well, we're not there yet. Oh, there we go. There we go. So I guess just by way of sort of setting the stage here, I was born in 1952 in Calgary, so it was a very different Alberta then. It was, you know, the population of the province was about what the population of the city of Calgary is now. And most of the people, a far greater part of the population was rural. Farms were smaller, usually more mixed farming than the bigger operations you see now, and it was just a very different world. I don't remember it too well because I was just born, right? But it was a very conservative Alberta. We were called the Bible Belt back then. It was a place that had very few trumpeter swans, very few grizzly bears, fall and spring grizzly bear hunting seasons. Actually, very few deer. I've in many parts of the province, I found an old hunting regulations of my grandfather's from about that era, and there was no deer hunting allowed east of Highway 2 and south of Highway 1 because there was virtually no deer out there. So a lot of things have changed. Some things have changed for the better, some things have changed for the worse. And I guess what triggered this particular book was the idea that we're at a difficult time in this province. We've been through difficult times before, but this is particularly unique. And we're dealing with this pandemic, which has sort of thrown a whole bunch of our assumptions about how we organize ourselves as communities and as societies and even as families, sort of thrown those for a loop. We've got climate change challenges, which are really putting us under the crosshairs in terms of our primary economic resource, being oil and gas, and an awful lot of people in the world working on the project of getting us off oil and gas. So much as all's forgotten and all the bumper stickers saying send another boomer being torn off right now because oil is worth something again, that's going to end. We've been booming and busting all the way along, and we're coming to the big bust that's going to be the end of the oil and gas era. So it's a time of great uncertainty, and I think some of the things that we've actually seen, some of the like this convoy business and everything like that, these are expressions of the tensions and the stresses that people are going through, and the anger that can bubble out of that. So if we're at a difficult time in this province, it doesn't change the fact that the future is going to come at us, and we're going to have to figure out a future that works, and it's not going to look like the past. I took a course one time in when I was still working before I retired. It was a management course, and the consultant had a lovely sort of thing that she built her presentations around. She said, an organization is simply a bunch of conversations. And I got a message, my internet connection is unstable. So give me a high sign if I'm fading out. So that's true. And I think a society is only a bunch of conversations, and a culture is a bunch of stories. And so what creates the landscape of possibilities for a culture, for society, is the kinds of conversations we have. And what I wanted to do with this book was to try and move the conversations to a different place than where they tend to dominate, tend to sit. When we hear about Alberta from outside of our borders, and quite often when we think about Alberta, it's a fairly narrow view, and it's a fairly negative view. We're seen as being, kind of hostile, kind of smug. It's all about oil and gas. Nothing else matters. And so that creates the frame in which conversations take place, and those conversations are not the ones that are going to get us to a future that works. They're incomplete. They're shallow. And they're backward looking. So that's where Wild Roses Are Worth It comes from. And I've been writing since I was a kid. My mother, God bless her, saved some of the stuff I wrote when I was a little kid and inflicted it on me a few years ago. I've still got it, but it will never be published. But I've been writing since I was a kid. I've been reading since I was a kid. The two go together. My first ventures into writing was writing hunting and fishing stories, because I was very keen about hunting and fishing in my earlier days. Still identify myself that way, but I'd say some of the zest is sort of faded. But I was really intense about the experiences I was having, and I wanted to share them, and writing was the way to do it. And so I started writing hunting and fishing stories for outdoor magazines. And then actually the thing that moved me from that, I started thinking, you know, this is just, you know, me and Joe. There's a limit to how far you can go with this. I wanted to do something more, something that had more value, something that would maybe have a so what that mattered. And so I thought I want to try some environmental journalism. And the first story I wrote was actually a Pincher Creek story. It was about the Three Rivers Dam on the Old Man River. And I remember my wife and I, she wasn't my wife at the time, we launched at Maycroft with our canoe and paddled down to, I think we finally took out of the bridge straight north of Pincher, and stopped and visited with people along the way that were going to be flooded out. This would have been in the mid 80s. And we actually paddled past our property, which of course in those days wasn't our property. So it was kind of neat. I can trace my connection to Pincher back to my development as a writer. And the story was well received, but the dam is there too. So obviously it didn't achieve what it was intended to do. Then I went through a number of years working in management with Parks Canada. And when you're working for Parks Canada or any organization at the level I was working, you can't have your own voice. You have to realize that everything you say is going to be in some ways associated with your work. And so I had to pretty much shut up. I had to turn off the writing thing. And then when I retired, I thought, okay, I can write again. I can finally get back to doing what probably I should have been doing instead of management, because I'm better at writing than managing. And around that time, I got a column with Alberta Views, which is a magazine that I'm very fond of. I think probably many of you will be familiar with it. But it was developed by Jackie Flanagan as a response to Alberta Report, which was pretty extreme, far right, polemical kind of thing, beating the table and complaining about Easterners and environmentalists and everybody that didn't support Alberta oil. So her sense was, we need a magazine that speaks to everything else in Alberta than that. And when I found it, I started submitting articles to them, and then they invited me to have a column. And after retiring, I'd written 2 or 3 books. I think I'd written 4 books actually. And I thought I need another project, but I didn't have an idea. And I was looking at this collection from Alberta Views, and I thought, well, geez, there's actually a body of work here. And when you bundle them up, the sum can sometimes amount to more than the individual parts, because they're all coming at certain themes from different directions and building a bigger conversation than any one of them does individually. And so that's what I did, and I put the book together. So I'm just going to read a couple sections from it, and it goes to changing the conversation. And what you're looking at in these slides, you're looking at a coal exploration road on Cabin Ridge, north of Blairmore. And then on the right, there's just a flaring gas well off in the Edson area when I was heading up to visit my daughter one time. And these are just backdrop pictures for the piece I'm going to read to you called Working Landscapes. And it goes to the idea that if we let other people shape our conversations, if we let other people give us the words with which to talk and the ideas with which to think, we are surrendering ourselves to what they want out of our place. And I don't think that's good enough. I don't think that is what Albertans should be. Albertans should be what we say we are, as independent thinkers and people with a clear vision of who we are and where we are. And that starts with taking back the language and taking back the stories. So I'm going to read a little bit here from Wild Roses. This is from the essay called Working Landscapes. Talk to anybody employed in forestry and you likely hear the term working forest. That's where feller bunchers and chainsaws convert living forests into trucks loaded with logs, most of northern western Alberta, in other words. I'm going to skip a couple of paragraphs in the hopes that maybe you've already read this, and if not, that you'll read it on your own afterwards. The working landscape is a concept that appeals to our materialistic culture. Why let things go to waste if they can be put to work generating profit? Deep ecologists, who see humans as just one of many equal components of nature, may scoff at the idea, but more pragmatic environmentalists seem comfortable enough with it. The late Francis Gardner, a respected foothills conservationist and rancher, once described his family's ranch to me as a working wilderness. He and his wife, Bonnie, saw their role as stewards of an intact ecosystem, and the wolves and grizzly bears living there as indicators, albeit challenging ones, of their success. Advocates of the working landscapes concept argue that we can make productive economic use of the land while still retaining its biodiversity and ecological functions. That's an attractive ideal and one worth working towards. The results, unfortunately, sometimes fail to match the rhetoric. Just as a working person is better than an idle one, and working parents often get more respect than those who stay home to raise their kids, the idea of a working landscape attaches economic and cultural worth to a landscape that many would otherwise see just as idle scenery. But it's predicated on a value system based on domination and subjugation. The darker side to the working metaphor, which applies to living places, is it assumes a moral right of corporate interest to colonize and repurpose whole ecosystems. I'm just going to skip ahead here. I don't want to read the whole thing here. Oh, I better not. I better keep reading this one. If it's a working landscape, then by implication, the logging companies, oil and gas industry, and livestock producers who put it to work should get to decide what happens there. Others, especially Indigenous peoples, environmentalists, and recreationists who might like it the way it is, should butt out or at least be grateful when the dominant class grants them the chance to offer humble suggestions. None of these working landscapes ever applied for the job, but in a society that accrues material wealth by exploiting natural resources, land is simply forced to do work we've assigned it. The same business interests who are so enamored of working landscape also love the term multiple use and often mention both in the same breath. We expect land to do several jobs at once: produce wood for mills, surrender oil and gas to be burned, feed coal, and be mined for, feed cows and be mined for its gravel, coal, and other subterranean assets. So these aren't working landscapes, they're multitasking landscapes, toiling away at tasks they never signed up for. When a human being is given no choice but to work at a job he or she never asked for, that's called slavery. By that definition, there are no working landscapes, only enslaved ones. The only free landscapes would be our parks and protected areas, and the remaining bits of the rest of the province that haven't yet been indentured to one or more resource companies. Far from having been sterilized, protected areas are places where land is allowed to do its real work. Because every one of those landscapes was already hard at work. They work at capturing rain and snow and filtering it through green vegetation and spongy soils into groundwater aquifers that feed springs, rivers, and downstream communities. They grow diverse plant communities that pull carbon dioxide from the air and put oxygen back in. They work tirelessly at providing habitat for native plants, animals, and fish, and spiritual renewal for many thousands of people. They hold memory, meaning, and life. Alberta's enslaved landscapes were never unemployed to start with, and most of the jobs we force them to do impair their ability to do their real work. That's how slavery works. It makes bosses rich by stealing the energies of their slaves. So as you can see, I sort of, after the Three Rivers Dam article, I did manage to sort of get my head turned towards environmental polemics, and I've written a bunch of them, and that's one of them. I've got a couple of even, I suppose, more hard-hitting ones in here, but I didn't want to depress everybody when we're already having a rough winter to begin with. But it goes to that idea that, if somebody says, well, that's a working landscape, and we just casually accept that comment, we just bought into a whole set of assumptions and a whole set of backstories that really don't relate to the place at all, and may not relate to its best future. And so what I'm hoping that this book will help to do is to challenge all of us to stop conversations and restart them from time to time when they start to take us down a road that somebody else wants to go down, rather than the road that we need to be on if we want to get to a future that honors the place that we live in and who we are as people of that place. But it's not just all polemic. The other piece that I think is critical for Alberta to find a future that works is for us to remind ourselves that we live in the center of the universe, that this is probably one of the finest places on the globe you could possibly live to, hope to live, and to fall in love with the place all over again. It's really weird how we go on holidays to these places that we think are exotic and beautiful and leave behind places that other people come on holidays to, because we're just taking it for granted. We live here, and yet sometimes we're oblivious to the beauty and the magic that surrounds us. So that takes me to another reading here. It'll be another short one, part of another essay. And you'll have to picture yourself back in August, which is kind of hard to do. I'll take you back to winter with my last reading here. I'll let this one speak for itself. A stillness comes over the natural world each August as birds cease their territorial singing and the year's crop of fledglings quietly fatten on the summer bounty of bugs and berries. Noise has its purpose in spring, when territories need to be defended and mates attracted, but it only serves to draw the attention of predators once the youngsters are out and about. I sat one day and looked up into the trees, contemplating that almost death-like calm. Aspen leaves glowed in the sun, shaped into a paisley mosaic by the overlap of light and shadow. Pine needles reached out of the forest gloom for their share of the sunlight. The forest floor was a dappled dance of late purple asters, fading grasses, and berry-covered shrubs. The world was verdant and alive, but so still as to seem a lifeless diorama of itself. Even in that calm, however, life shimmered everywhere. Each leaf, millions upon millions of them, was pulling gases out of the air into translucent cells, where billions of tiny chloroplasts, like microscopic solar panels, trapped the light of the sun. Each chloroplast was using that transmuted sunshine to change carbon dioxide, extracted from the air, and water and trace minerals drawn up from the forest soil into living matter. Medieval alchemists frequently poisoned themselves or went bankrupt in their quest to find a way to change other substances into gold and inert metal. But no human alchemy could ever equal the magic that unfolds silently in the leaves that shade our summer afternoons. Sunshine, air, and water converted not just into energy, but into life itself. While I watched the flickering mystery of the forest canopy overhead, down beneath the forest floor, the secret society of roots is probing into the dark of the earth, pulling water out of the soil and feeding it into the wood cells that pipe it up the trees to the leaves. Insects foraged among the green canopy. In devouring living leaves, they were turning plant matter into protein and chitin. And the quiet birds hunting those insects would transmute them in turn into living muscle and fat. When forest birds migrate, their tiny bodies are entirely composed of new life that arose from photosynthesis in the leaves among which they were hatched. They may fly above it, but they can never leave the forest because they are entirely made of it. Those are actually colorful bits of forests that migrate to faraway places each fall. Fancy that. So, yeah, there's a few pieces in here relating to trying to see nature more clearly, trying to see our places more fully, and reminding ourselves of the fact that our relationships should not all just be human relationships. They should not just be with ourselves, with our family, that just as a good relationship with a person is defined by love and by restraint and by giving, that's the relationship we should have with the place we live in. And that kind of relationship will sustain the productive capacity of our landscapes, sustain the potential in ourselves, and give us a future that could work. But applying a bulldozer all this stuff so that we can strip something up from underneath it, or blithely building roads, or exploiting it without any thought about the fact that this is actually a piece of ourselves that we are sacrificing, doesn't really lead anywhere good. Certainly doesn't lead anywhere sustainable. And we've lost a lot in this province, but we still have so much. And that's the part that gives us our future and our hope, and gives us our identity as Albertans. Not oil, not gas, not prosperity, which is really just consumption. But the nature of the place we live in, and that we name ourselves after when we call ourselves Albertans. one of the things that I try to do here from time to time is recognizing that I only know what I've learned. I've forgotten half of it. I've only had the experiences I have, but there are so many other people with whom we are privileged to live, that live next door, live down the road a ways, that are part of our Alberta community, that have wonderful stories that really don't get enough airtime. I'm kind of tired of hearing about politicians, but I sure do like to hear about the people I know. And so that comes back to this last little reading I'm going to do. I'm going to split this one up, the beginning of the essay and the end of the essay. And the bottom left corner is the family, actually, that I start with. I don't think I have the Cartwrights here, but I've got the Stelfoxes. Henry Stelfox arrived in Calgary during one of the worst winters in our history, the endless cold of 1906-07, that by some estimates killed more than half the cattle in the province. He and his wife eventually settled near Rocky Mountain House and raised 9 kids. He ranched cattle, cut wood, dabbled in real estate, and bought furs as they adapted to the challenges of living in a young and not particularly prosperous province. Farther south, that same killing winter set events in motion that helped Aubrey Cartwright start up his D-Ranch on Pekisco Creek. Disheartened by their losses, some of the small homesteaders in the area decided to sell out. Cartwright and his partners consolidated some of those small holdings into a large ranch. His son, Jim, eventually passed it on to Gordon and John Cartwright. I remember as a young boy asking my father how much land we owned, Gordon Cartwright said recently. My father took care to explain that no man could truly own land. The deed or lease by which we held the land was really our covenant to look after it. The Cartwrights looked after it well. Faced with the prospect of a major gas field development in their green, well-watered landscape, the Cartwright brothers joined their neighbors in a costly but ultimately successful effort to head it off. They then arranged for their leased pasture lands to be included in a new protected heritage rangeland. On his deeded land, Gordon locked in his family's tradition of responsible stewardship by registering a conservation easement with the Southern Alberta Land Trust Society. The easement ensures that the land can never be broken or subdivided. Henry Stelfox created a conservation legacy too, not least by passing on his stewardship ethic to grandkids devoted to forest conservation, landscape health, wildlife, and fisheries. Stelfox believed in public service as a duty, not as a sinecure. He signed on as the region's game warden and traveled the upper Clearwater River country, keeping an eye on wildlife conditions and making sure hunters and anglers stuck to the rules. His work brought him into contact with Cree, Chippewa, and Stoney people who lived in those remote foothills, and he soon became their advocate. What really struck me was this next bit. When the government insisted that Stelfox accept payment for his services, he quit. It was against his principles to accept money for serving the public interest. An interesting contrast to the expense account and severance scandals we hear about too often these days. I'm just going to skip a bit towards the end here. Aretha Van Herk popularized the idea that Alberta's culture is defined by its mavericks, larger-than-life risk-takers who grabbed our sprawling natural landscapes and shook fortunes out of them. It's an attractive creation myth for those who see resource exploitation as a way to accumulate wealth. As such, it's been widely misappropriated to support a vision of this place founded on greed and ambition. Further afield, Alberta is seen as a land of defiant rednecks and pickup trucks. Visit the foothills on a May-long weekend, and that stereotype might not seem far from the mark. But that version of Alberta leaves out the Stelfoxes and Cartwrights, whose quiet work and self-sacrifice not only built our province, but preserved much of it from the reckless exploitation that continues to make it less than it was meant to be. It admits conservationists like Kerry Wood and Grant McEwen, who gave us a very different set of stories about what Alberta is and who Albertans are. Lois Hole and Jean Lougheed, champions of the arts, built heritage and philanthropy, don't contribute much to the greed-based story of Alberta, but they too are among the real Albertans who define us at our best. The quiet labors of Indigenous people like Kansi Fox and Api Sumawaka, who work to restore their lands and cultures from the ravages of colonialism, go ignored when their province lets itself be defined by tales of pillage and privilege. The place we love has never lacked for people who love it back. We just don't give them enough airtime. In the beginning, there was the Word, it says in the book of Genesis. Who controls the Word controls the story, and a culture is the product of stories. As Alberta struggles once again to shape a sustainable future in the face of yet another bust in the oil patch, it might be well to revisit the stories by which we define ourselves. Wild Rose Country's best stories, Alberta's true Genesis stories, don't derive from exploitation. They come from the kind of deep commitment to our home place that expresses itself in caring stewardship of its lands, waters, fish, wildlife, and communities. We have lots of those stories, and we have it in us to make a great many more. So that is sort of a sampler of what Wild Roses Are Worth It contains and is meant to be and hopes to achieve. It's been interesting trying to launch this darn book. I've now launched 2 books into a pandemic, and I tell you, it's trying to launch a canoe or a motorboat single-handed when the water is receding. All you got is mud to push it through. Talking to live audiences is a nostalgic memory for me these days, and Zoom. Although I noticed from the way that everybody came in here, we're all very used to Zoom now. It doesn't quite live up to expectations. But I hope that if you don't have a copy of Wild Roses Are Worth It, that you might consider hunting one down at some point. I don't know all the booksellers in the region, but I do know that Crockett's out at where is Crockett's? It's not Blairmore. Anyway, Crockett's out in the past there, stocks pretty much every local and regional author. It's a wonderful little store. They call themselves a trading shop and look like a gift shop, but they're one of the better bookstores that I've been into for homegrown writing. So that's one I would suggest you might want to check out if you don't currently have a copy. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. I've got one more slide to show you. Which is just thanks to Rocky Mountain Books for publishing this book. It's very hard publishing books right now. They took a big chance on this one. I checked with the publisher the other day. He said he wasn't entirely disappointed. So I think that's good. Evan Ossington, Jackie Flanagan, and the rest of the Alberta Views team for giving me a place to put words that I'd worked on. Obviously, the Pincher Creek Municipal Library for hosting this event, and the many good, caring Albertans who shared their stories and their wisdom, because my writing doesn't come out of my brain, it comes out of the brains of the people I've met, and I've met some wonderful people. And Wild Rose Country itself, of course. So that's it from me in terms of what I was bringing into the presentation, but I'm really hoping there'll be some conversation and discussion, because that's, in some ways, that's where the connection between the text and the audience becomes most real, because the audience comes into it. So I'm going to open it up for questions and comments, and I don't see anything on the chat. So
sorry, Kevin. I just wanted to pop in here really quick and just say that the Pincher Creek Library, and I know the library system, Chinook Arch Regional Library System, we have our own personal copy, at least one of Wild Roses Are Worth It. And I know that it is within the system at other libraries as well. So if you can't find a copy, that is an option as well.
I forgot about that, but totally right. Yeah, thank God for libraries. They kept us going through the pandemic, I'll tell you.
Well, we tried. So if anyone has any questions, you can just start typing in the chat here, and I will read them out to Kevin, or else he can read them for himself, whatever works best. I just have to say, Kevin, that I think it's beautiful how you put imagery and facts in at the same time. Like, I think that's a really beautiful way of writing, and a way of writing that I, for one, would really hope to achieve one day. It's, you write as if it's a painting going onto the canvas, but you are so knowledgeable and you bring so many years of knowledge and just love into your writing, and I really appreciate it. It's really, really well done.
Well, thank you very much. That's I really appreciate hearing that, actually.
Ah.
I see Monica's comment there too. So thank you, Monica, too.
Mm-hmm. So,
Geez,
I'm
this
just
would be a short
trying.
meeting.
I'm just trying to think if I have any questions for you while we're waiting for people to. Oh, here's one. I am curious as the superintendent of Banff. Are there too many people going to Banff now? They are doing shuttle buses as there is no parking. I think this is a problem. What do you think?
Well, I think I'm happy to be retired. I'll tell you that. Yeah, I touch on that in a couple of the essays in Wild Roses are worth it. National parks are a real conundrum, and I guess I guess there's no easy answers. Banff has been a problem from the day it was born. You know, these places were established to protect nature and then to connect Canadians to nature. If you read the National Parks Act, they're dedicated to the people of Canada, actually to the future generations. They're not even dedicated to us. They're always dedicated to the future generations. And they're to be kept unimpaired for the future generations. And so that's always been their mandate. They're for Canadians and they're to be protected for us to experience and learn from. But right from the beginning, they've been managed as tourism resorts, resources. And so when I was working in Banff, I was actually on the board of the Banff Lake Louise Tourism. It was one of those ones where, boy, you better be in the room, because if you're out of the room, you're not going to know what's going on in there, right? And it was all about marketing to the world. They put, you know, thousands of dollars every year into trying to get people from around the world to come to Banff. And yeah, Banff does not exist for international tourism. It's not a resource to exploit for tourism. It's one of our national shrines, and it's dedicated to us. So that problem has been there from the beginning, and it's now just hardened in, and it's impossible to get away from. So there's one reason that Banff is so crowded, is just because it's loaded with tourists. But it's worse than that in a way, because we're a very prosperous society. We're a very mobile society, and with the dawn of digital interactions, where we live half our lives on social media, you know, Instagram, Facebook, things like that. Everybody wants to get out of doors and show everybody else what a great life they're living. And so there's this big surge in outdoor recreation that's unprecedented. It's nothing like what certainly what I knew as I was a kid. There is no place you can go where there aren't people. And that's obviously a problem when you take that phenomenon and add it onto an existing park. So yeah, Banff's way too overcrowded, but so is Kananaskis, and increasingly so are parts of the castle and other parts of the landscape we live in. Everybody is out there, and from one point of view, that's a great thing, because they're all connecting with nature. But when you look at the connections that I see when I'm out there, a lot of them are pretty superficial. Jabbering to each other on the trail, leaving their little bags of dog poop off to the side in the bushes, taking lots of cell phone pictures, posting them on Facebook. But you don't see that sort of engagement with the landscape that tells you that gives you hope that people are going home different than they were when they came. It's just simply become another thing to consume. It's another sort of commodity that allows us to demonstrate our lifestyle to each other. So yeah, it's a problem. We're probably gonna end up in a situation where there's gonna have to be quotas on places, and that really sucks to me, because I've been all about freedom, right? And I've thrived on the fact that I could go anywhere I want in Western Canada all the time. I loved it, but I think that era is gonna have to be behind us, right? So I don't know. I don't think that's an answer. If anything, it's just a confirmation that I agree with you. I'm trying to. These chats are filling up now. There's a couple of scrolled by that I didn't see, so I might have to leave this to you, Samantha.
Now there's 3 more questions, so are you ready?
Oh yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Okay, so Cheryl Bradley says, thanks, Kevin. I'm interested in your writing process. Do you write descriptions of the landscape or past conversations from memory, or do you take copious notes in the moment or immediately after?
Well, thank you for that question, and nice to hear from you too, Cheryl. It's a little bit of both. There was a period of time in my life when I kept journals because it was when I was young, in my 20s, and I was excited about everything. And so every evening I come back, if I would be out in the woods or out hunting or fishing or in the field doing biology, I'd come back and do a write-up of what I'd seen that day. And so I think that exercise of writing that journal was hugely important because it gave me the habit of just describing what was fresh. And so now when I write things, I'm pulling them out of my memory, or I'm pulling them out of pictures that I've got in my head, but I'm using the writing, skill that I developed in those days, and then refined through many years of writing articles and things like that. So, but I'm currently working on a memoir, and I'm realizing that you asked, do I write from memory? Well, I better not. What I've discovered is that when I start to write something I remember, then I go back to my journal, I discover it didn't happen that way. so that's a bit tricky. But really, what it is it's taking experience and taking the thoughts you had during those experiences and just trying to get them onto the page, and then doing it in a coherent way. I quite often start with an anecdote that sort of creates a picture, because that engages me and it engages the reader, and then I do my exposition in the main part, and then I come back to that anecdote at the end and use it as a sort of a in case you're wondering why I started with that story, here's what it actually shows us. One of the things that I think that I always write in the first person, so it sounds like just Joe Eagle, right? But I really do think it's important to recognize that all of our experiences are parables. Everything that we do has a lesson in it, and that lesson's cool and very interesting. And so that's where a lot of this writing comes from.
Very interesting answer. Monica Field asks, how do we get our government to pay attention to the need for change? Ooh, this is a doozy. They would benefit from your insights, but are unlikely to actually read your book.
Well, yeah, that's true, Monica. Current government has no time for me at all. I can't get in the door with my MLA. She's canceled out on 2 meetings, and I just gave up on her finally. It's a challenge, but at the end of the day, the government the government's priority is to get reelected, so that it can use its power to do the things that it thinks are important. I'm not going to get into party politics here, but they've all got an agenda based on their view of the world, and they want to implement it, and to do that they need power, and that to have power they need to be elected. And so they are sensitive to the fact that they have to appeal to the electorate. And one thing we've certainly seen, I would say, with the way that the issue about coal strip mining has blown up in the last year and a half, is that once in a while they get a message from the electorate that says, you're on the wrong track, guys. You are not thinking the way we are thinking, and if you don't get in line, you might be not the one implementing your vision. It might be another government implementing their vision. So I think that's where it comes back to saying, let's find ways to connect people to the places they live in, the values of these places, and to the fact that they are not alone and they are not weirdos or eco-terrorists. I see Ellen's asked about being an eco-terrorist. Like don't let other people put words in your mouth and put thoughts in your head. we think each of us, every environmentalist I know in Alberta, everybody that cares deeply about the conservation of nature has been made to feel alone, that we're not mainstream, we're outsiders. But what we see with the coal issue is that no, we are mainstream. We've been sold a different story, a very useful story for the people that want to isolate us. But guess what? We can isolate them. And so I think, again, it comes back to the idea of we need to consciously live in this place, consciously tell the stories that need to be told about it, and engage with each other so that other people don't feel alone and other people aren't stuck with the thoughts that have been put into their heads by vested interests. We can't change the way politicians think. We can't change the nature of that beast, but we can change the stimuli that they respond to, because at the end of the day, they respond to us. And so we have to be the best that we can be, and let them see that that's where our values are. That's the project. It's not easy. There's no answer. There's no light switch that'll make things better. We'll be, since the dawn of humankind, these conflicts, these competing interests have played out. But who owns the story is the one that has the most chance to win, and we need to grab the story.
Okay, so here's another question from Kathy Scrimshaw. You've been a lightning rod for the folks who see the natural world as a resource. Are you making any progress with these folks?
Geez, I really don't know. I don't, I will say that for all that I've framed this as almost a binary thing between exploitation and love of place, it isn't that black and white. An awful lot of the people that are in the resource sector, working in resource companies, working in resource management agencies of government, are there because they love the place. In some cases, it's just their job, but they chose to work close to the land rather than far from it. In many cases, in their spare time, they recreate, they hunt, or they fish, or they hike. There's an awful lot of shades of gray, and there's an awful lot of pieces of everybody. It's sort of almost like that. The religion I was grown up in, was all around the idea that there aren't bad people and there aren't good people. There is just people, and we have bad and good in us. And so those pieces can be pulled out. I think that the more that you talk out of love of place, the more that you shine a flashlight, a bright light on the nature of how the world works and the nature of how our decisions influence it, and what that means for our future. The more that you do that, the more the potential is that you can pluck the pieces of people that care about those things and pull those to the surface. That all you can do is try, right? I'm not very good at management. I'm not very good at politics. I'm pretty good at writing because I've been doing it all my life. So that's the part I work on. I just figure I got to get stuff out there in writing, and hopefully it's connecting with some people. And even if it's not persuading people or moving them away from their resource mindset, it's at least broadening their field of view, so that they're not just locked in on I'm gonna do what I do and damn the consequences, because I can't even see the consequences.
You spoke about that there's many shades of gray. Like there's not just black and white. There's lots of gray in between. Do you feel, because from my perspective, on my computer, looking at social media, living in a small town, there is black and white, and I don't get to see the gray areas very often. Do you think that there are a lot of people who are able to look at both sides and come to kind of cordial conclusions that benefit both? Or do you think there's more of that tug and pull rather than cooperation?
It's there. I truly believe it's there. That we have more overlap in our values and in our interests and our concerns than shows when you look at the world, certainly as it's projected to us through media or bumper stickers or whatever the issue of the day is. But the thing is, right now, we're at a time in history when everybody is a psychological mess. We're all stir crazy, and it's winter, so half of us have got seasonal affective disorder, and everybody's worried about feeding their families because the economy is uncertain. And there's this pandemic thing. When is this darn thing ever going to end? And so all these things are chewing on us. And when you've got that kind of stress in you, you're primed to explode. And you're primed to react. And so anger is a big piece of it. And when we see polarity, when we see black and white in our communities, and seeming no compromise, no place of connection, what you're seeing is an expression of those angry impulses that pull people apart and lock them into a position. It's one reason why I really try in my social media and I really try in my writing not to have bad guys anymore. If I can have a bad guy, it's going to be a politician because they were made for that, and they're used to it. But we need to turn down the emotion, the negative emotions, and turn up the compassion, both for one another but also for the landscape. And when you change the nature of the discussion, then those overlapping possibilities that pull communities together start to happen. But as long as you focus on the fact that somebody just behaved like a jerk, and then you react accordingly, you're pulling the community apart. And I don't, this is not easy to fix, but none of us is going to save the world, but we can certainly save ourselves and save our interaction with the world. And we can change the conversations into conversations that aren't focused on the other person being wrong, but focus on the things that we value and the things we want to share with them, and open up that invitation to look out jointly at our place and say, yeah, this is our place and this is who we are. And guess what? We just use the term we. It's us. I don't know. I'm being an idealist, but you got to have an ideal to work towards, and that would be my response to that.
You do. That's a really good response, I have to say. So Alan he says, to change tax, would you ever comment on the potential for regenerative agriculture to improve our lands, both domesticated, exploited, and the wildlands?
I think I touch on that in the book in a couple spots. I've got one of the longer pieces in there relates to buying locally, shopping locally for grass-finished beef as an alternative to phony meat and as an alternative to supermarket meat. Regenerative agriculture is a big term that's a big umbrella that sits over a bunch of things, but primarily what it's about is it's actually getting the soil alive again by putting roots into it and sustaining them. And we've got the prairie part of our province, and especially the irrigated regions, are just biologically devastated because we've exploited them. We've basically just used the soil as a growth medium and used the rivers as a water source, and we've just wiped out everything in the interests of producing, well, I would say junk food when you look at the potato chips and the corn chips and things that are coming out of irrigation country in Alberta, and fat marbled beef on fat feedlots. So if we want to get biodiversity back into our landscape, and that way, and by that means back into our lives, and by that means back into our nature as people, We need to find a way to approach agriculture differently. And there are people doing it all the time, but we have an economy that doesn't value it. I really think that the way that we open the door for regenerative agriculture to play a big role in restoring soil health, river health, biodiversity, is to stop shopping at supermarkets, because they're all around processed, mass-produced food, which comes out of these mass systems, and start looking for who in our neighborhood is selling stuff, at the farm gate or in the farmer's market, and selling things that they've grown with their grown slowly, slow food grown slowly on land that appreciates the way it's treated when that happens. Oh, it's huge. But again, there's just no easy answers. The future is going to be really challenging, because we've got an awful lot of people on this planet now, far more than this planet can sustain, especially if they all want to live at the kind of prosperity that Albertans seem to take as our birthright. That demands an awful lot of ecosystems, and the damage, the consequences that are everywhere visible.
Okay, are there any more questions, or are there any comments or questions that I missed in the chat?
Well, if there aren't, then all I can say is thank you, everybody, for having given me a part of your evening here. And although didn't get to see your faces, it's sure good to know you're there. And hopefully you'll enjoy Wild Roses Are Worth It if you haven't read it. And in any case, hopefully you'll enjoy this beautiful place we live in, and we'll stumble into each other out there.
Yes, Kevin, I have to say, I came across you by accident. Actually, my mom was way back in like August last year. I was thinking of winter speaker ideas, and my mom follows you on Facebook, and she mentioned your name. So that's how I got to know about you. And I've been waiting for your book. It's pretty popular in the library, so there's quite a bit of holds on it. But I'm really excited, even more so, to read it now. So thank you for spending time with us, and maybe in the future you could come and actually be in person, and that would be a cool treat.
That would certainly be nice. My wife and I get an awful lot of each other, but we're sort of kind of looking forward to seeing other humans as well.
Isn't that the truth, eh?
Well, thank you very much.
I'm going to just let everyone know here, these sessions are being recorded. So if you know anybody who you think would have enjoyed the session tonight, in a week, it will be up on the Chinook Arch YouTube page. And you're welcome to go there and rewatch it and watch the presentation from last week as well. It does take a week for each presentation to be uploaded to YouTube. So by next Tuesday, Kevin's should be up on there. And if you need help finding it, just give the library a call and we'd be happy to help you find the YouTube page and find where it is. Thank you, Kevin, so much for being with us tonight. And thank you to all the members of the audience who came on their computers and took some time out of their night to listen to our second session of the 2022 Winter Speaker Series.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Bye.